2061 Odyssey 3 by Arthur C. Clarke. Chapter 12. Paul, or Paul. Rolf Vanderberg had not seen his Uncle Paul for a decade, and it was not likely they would ever again meet in the flesh. Yet, he felt very close to the old scientist, the last of his generation, and only one who could recall, when he wished, which was seldom, his forefathers' way of life. Dr. Paul Kruger, Paul, to all his family and most of his friends, was always there when he was needed, with information and advice, either in person or at the end of a half-billion-kilometer radio link. Rumor had it that only extreme political pressure had forced the Nobel Committee to overlook his contributions to particle physics. Now, once more in desperate disarray, after the general house cleaning at the end of the 20th century. If this was true, Dr. Kruger bore no grudges. Modest and unassuming, he had no personal enemies, even among the cantankerous factions of his fellow exiles. Indeed, he was so universally respected that he had received several invitations to revisit the United States of Southern Africa, but had always politely declined. Not, he hastened to explain, because he felt he would be in any physical danger in the USSA, but because he feared that the sense of nostalgia would be overwhelming. Even using the security of a language now understood by less than 1 million people, Vandenberg had been very discreet, and had used circumlocution and references that would be meaningless except to a close relative. But Paul had no difficulty in understanding his nephew's message, though he could not take it seriously. He was afraid young Rolf had made a fool of himself and would let him down as gently as possible. Just as well he hadn't rushed to publication. At least he had the sense to keep quiet. And just suppose it was true. The scanty hairs rose on the back of Paul's head, a whole spectrum of possibilities: scientific, financial, political, suddenly opened up before his eyes, and the more he considered them, the more awesome they appeared. Unlike his devout ancestors, Dr. Kruger had no God to address in moments of crisis or perplexity. Now he almost wished he had. But even if he could pray, that wouldn't really help. As he sat down at his computer and started to access the databanks, he did not know whether to hope that his nephew had made a stupendous discovery or was talking utter nonsense. Could the old one really play such an incredible trick on mankind? Paul remembered Einstein's famous comment that though he was subtle, he was never malicious. Stop daydreaming, Dr. Kruger, Dr. Paul Kruger told himself. Your likes or dislikes, your hopes or fears have absolutely nothing to do with the matter. A challenge had been flung to him across half the width of the solar system. He would not know peace until he had uncovered the truth. Chapter 13. No one told us to bring swimsuits. Captain Smith kept his little surprise until day 5, just a few hours before turnaround. His announcement was received, as he had expected, with stunned incredulity. Victor Willis was the first to recover. A swimming pool in a spaceship? You must be joking. The captain leaned back and prepared to enjoy himself. He grinned at Haywood Floyd, who had already been let into the secret. Well, I suppose Columbus would have been amazed at some of the facilities on the ships that came after him. Is there a diving board? Asked Greenberg wistfully. I used to be college champion. As a matter of fact, yes. It's only 5 meters, but that will give you 3 seconds of free fall at our nominal tenth of a G. And if you want a longer time, I'm sure Mr. Curtis will be happy to reduce thrust. Indeed, said the chief engineer dryly, and mess up all my orbit calculations, not to mention the risk of the water crawling out. Surface tension, you know? Wasn't there a space station once that had a spherical swimming pool? Somebody asked. They tried it at the Hubble Pasteur before they started to spin, answered Floyd. It's, it just wasn't practical. In zero gravity, it had to be completely enclosed, and you could drown rather easily inside a big sphere of water if you panicked. One way of getting into the record books, first person to drown in space. No one told us to bring swimsuits, complained Maggie Mbala. Anyone who has to wear a swimsuit probably should, Mihailovich whispered to Floyd. Captain Smith rapped on the table to restore order. This is more important, please. As you know, at midnight we reach maximum speed and have to start braking. So the drive will shut down at 2300 hours and the ship will be reversed. We'll have 2 hours of weightlessness before we commence thrust again at 0100 hours. As you can imagine, the crew will be rather busy. We'll use the opportunity for an engine check and a hull inspection, which can't be done while we're under power. I strongly advise you to be sleeping then, with the restraint straps lightly fastened across your beds. The stewards will check that there aren't any loose articles that could cause trouble when weight comes on again. Questions? There was a profound silence, as if the assembled passengers were still somewhat stunned by the revelation and were deciding what to do about it. I was hoping you'd ask me about the economics of such a luxury, but as you haven't, I'll tell you anyway. It's not a luxury at all. It doesn't cost a thing, but we hope it will be a very valuable asset on future voyages. You see, we have to carry 5,000 tons of water as reaction mass, so we might as well make the best use of it. Number one tank is now 3/4 empty. We'll keep it that way until the end of the voyage. So after breakfast tomorrow, see you down at the beach. Considering the rush to get Universe spaceborne, it was surprising that such a good job had been done on something so spectacularly non essential. The beach was a metal platform about 5 meters wide, curving around a third of the great tank's circumference. Although the far wall was only another 20 meters away, clever use of projected images made it seem at infinity. Borne on the waves in the middle distance, surfers were heading toward a shore which they would never reach. Beyond them, a beautiful passenger clipper that any travel agent would recognize instantly as Fong Sea Space Corporation's Taipan was racing along the horizon under a full spread of sail. To complete the illusion, there was sand underfoot, slightly magnetized so it would not stray too far from its appointed place, and the short length of beach ended in a grove of palm trees that were quite convincing until examined too closely. Overhead, a hot tropical sun completed the idyllic picture. It was hard to realize that just beyond these walls, the real sun was shining, now twice as fiercely as on any terrestrial beach. The designer had really done a wonderful job in the limited space available. It seemed a little unfair of Greenberg to complain. Pity there's no surf. Chapter 14. Search. It is a good principle in science not to believe any fact, however well attested, until it fits into some accepted frame of reference. Occasionally, of course, an observation can shatter the frame and force the construction of a new one, but that is extremely rare. Galileo's and Einstein's seldom appear more than once per century, which is just as well for the equanimity of mankind. Dr. Kruger fully accepted this principle. He would not believe his nephew's discovery until he could explain it, and as far as he could see, that required nothing less than a direct act of God. Wielding Occam's still highly serviceable razor, he thought it somewhat more probable that Rolf had made a mistake. If so, it should be fairly easy to find it. To Uncle Paul's surprise, it proved very difficult indeed. The analysis of radar remote sensing observations was now a venerable and well established art, and the experts that Paul consulted all gave the same answer. After considerable delay, they also asked, "Where did you get that recording?" "Sorry," he had answered, "I'm not at liberty to say." The next step was to assume that the impossible was correct and to start searching the literature. This could be an enormous job, for he did not even know where to begin. One thing was quite certain: a brute force head on attack was bound to fail. It would be just as if Roentgen, the morning after he had discovered X rays, had started to hunt for their explanation in the physics journals of his day. The information he needed still lay years in the future. But there was at least a sporting chance that what he was looking for was hidden somewhere in the immense body of existing scientific knowledge. Slowly and carefully, Paul Kruger set up an automatic search program designed for what it would exclude as much as what it would embrace. It should it should cut out all Earth-related references. They would certainly number in the millions, and concentrate entirely on extraterrestrial citations. One of the benefits of Dr. Kruger's eminence was an unlimited computer budget. That was part of the Fehi demanded, Fihi demanded from the various organizations that needed his wisdom. Though this search might be expensive, he did not have to worry about the bill. As it turned out, this was surprisingly small. He was lucky. The search came to an end after only 2 hours 37 minutes at the 21,456th reference. The title was enough. Paul was so excited that his own comsec refused to recognize his voice, and he had to repeat the command for a full printout. Nature had published the paper in 1981, almost 5 years before he was born. And as his eyes swept swiftly over its single page, he knew not only that his nephew had been right all along, but, just as important, exactly how such a miracle could occur. The editor of that 80-year-old journal must have had a good sense of humor. A paper discussing the cores of the outer planets was not something to grab the casual reader. This one, however, had an unusually striking title. His comsec could have told him quickly enough that it had once been part of a famous song, but that of course was quite irrelevant. Anyway, Paul Kruger had never heard of the Beatles and their psychedelic fantasies. End of part one. Oh, and the song is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Dear Paul McCartney, Jackson.